I'd like to call this meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Zarzecki, can you please call roll?
Mr. Roman?
Here.
Ms. Chick?
Here.
Mr. Aquinto?
Here.
Mr. Kuzno?
Here.
Zarzecki, President. Mr. Dreyer?
Yep.
Ms. Afante?
Here.
All present.
Thank you. I'll make a motion we approve the agenda.
Support.
Supported by Mr. Aquino. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. First call to the public. Anyone wishing to address the Planning Commission may do so now. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening. Tawn Bellinger from 8365 Earhart. I'm here to speak on the marijuana ordinances. First off, I want to express my appreciation to the Planning Commission and to the members for their work and diligence in executing the task of outlining marijuana ordinances for our township. Aside from your work, which I do sincerely appreciate, I have heard from numerous persons in our township that are not supportive of introducing such businesses into our community. Thus, I will remain unwavering in my opposition to the introduction of such businesses in Northfield Township. I personally feel such businesses would pose unnecessary risks as to being destructively detrimental to the family-friendly and welcoming charm of our township. Once again, I want to thank you, though, for the work that you've done.
Thank you. Anyone else? Just state your name and address, please.
Mike McClelland, 5313 Hilltop Court. Thank you for this opportunity to address you this evening. I live just north of Joy Road on the southern edge of our township. I'm a husband and father of 6 kids, and I greatly enjoy the family-friendly life we have in Northfield Township. I'd just like to make a few points for you this evening. The first is that most may be aware of this, that marijuana is still illegal in the United States under federal law, specifically under the Controlled Substances Act. Due to its illegal status, marijuana is a cash business in Michigan. As noted in the Detroit News and many other media outlets, banks and credit card companies generally refuse to touch marijuana industry because they are regulated by federal agencies like the FDIC, the Comptroller of the Currency, the Federal Reserve Bank. Marijuana businesses in Michigan must effectively launder their large cash proceeds. According to Patricia Herndon, Senior Vice President of Government Relations at the Michigan Bankers Association, the fact is that it is considered by federal standards money laundering. Illegal cash businesses have a nasty habit of attracting other illegal activities and criminal individuals. This is a gold rush that will end badly for most of the businesses that go into it. A great deal of money is sitting on the sidelines ready to pour into this new golden opportunity. As a banker for many years, I was always wary of situations that were inevitably boom-bust cycles. Eager opportunists will invest in get-rich-quick-in-pot schemes only to be crushed by oversupply and large industrial interests. Marijuana grows fast and easily. Oversupply is inevitable. So if we bank on some tax rationale for having these types of businesses in our community, we may not collect what we expect. Marijuana has been sold and sold and sold to Michigan citizens as nearly a harmless substance and a great source of tax revenue. It is not harmless, as a growing mountain of evidence indicates. Professor of Psychiatry Keith Humphreys at Stanford University notes, millions of people who use the drug say that it causes problems. It impairs concentration, short-term memory, and motivation. To me, as a township citizen, a great source of tax revenue is not one that builds on vice that destroys individuals. I would not support, for example, casinos or brothels in Northfield Township, no matter how compelling the tax revenue case may be. I'm concerned that Northfield Township does not have the law enforcement capacity to deal with all the levels of this business and sort of the implications it might have. I would like to see Northfield Township opt out of hosting the marijuana business.
Thank you.
Through the chair, if
Yes,
I may,
Mr. Lippens.
it might be a good opportunity to remind the audience that we have a public hearing on the marijuana issue scheduled this evening.
I will. We do, if you have further comments regarding marijuana, it's open, it's a item on our agenda for public hearing. Perhaps you can save comment for that time when you can address the commission regarding that topic. Anyone else want to address the planning commission regarding anything else?
Hello, everyone. David Gordon, 5558 Helena Road. Happy spring. The Great Blue Herons are back. I just wanted to let you know how magical a place we have because it's 6 Mile and Whitmore Lake Road on the southwest side of 23. There's a rookery there with at least 6 and maybe up to a dozen breeding pairs of great blue herons in the wetland that's there. It's a magical place. I'll save my comments on marijuana till later, but prohibiting it is similar to prohibition. That didn't work out very well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, we'll move on. Clarifications from commissioners, any? Seeing none, we'll move on. Correspondence, we did get one letter. It was provided by Ms. Bird prior to the meeting. Everyone should have a copy. Anything else, Ms. Bird? We'll start with the public hearings. I'll explain the process. We'll open the public hearing for each item. I'll call on Mr. Lippens to present his report. After that, I will call on those of from the public that support or oppose. We will put a 3-minute time limit per speaker. And the board will call for a closing of the public hearing on a voice vote. So with that, I make a motion we open public hearing for the sign ordinance.
Support.
Supported by Ms. Chick. Any questions on that? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Mr. Lippens.
Planning Commission has scheduled tonight a public hearing on the sign ordinance that's been discussed by Planning Commission to the board. This item was previously forwarded to the board without holding a public hearing, which we discussed at our last meeting. So we have posted and are holding a public hearing this evening to accept comments from the public prior to forwarding this to the board for consideration a second time. The changes made to the ordinance are to make the township's sign regulations consistent with a recent Supreme Court ruling, which essentially states that signs should be regulated for the purpose of public health, safety, and welfare, and be content neutral. Essentially, that design regulations and place and manner regulations are a legitimate government interest to regulate, but regulations beyond that that go to content and speech are not really applicable to, or should not be applicable to regulation in signs. So we've discussed these revisions. No changes are in these documents since the last time Planning Commission had reviewed them, and they are posted for public hearing. So we're happy to take comments from the public this evening.
Thank you. Anyone in the public wish to, yes, anyone in the public wish to comment on the sign ordinance? Anyone?
Make a motion to close the public hearing for the sign ordinance.
Support. Motion to close the public hearing for the sign ordinance by Mr. Iacono, supported by myself. Any questions on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. And make a motion, we open a public hearing for recreational medical marijuana ordinance.
So move.
Supported by Mr. Kuzno. Any questions on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Mr. Lippens.
Planning Commission was directed by the Township Board to draft an ordinance to consider the siting of recreational and medical marijuana facilities in the township. There are several acts relating to protection of marijuana-related activities in the state of Michigan, and the ordinance that we've prepared, that Planning Commission has prepared over the last several months, addresses both the provision of recreational marijuana and medical marijuana in the township. So the classes of uses that are permitted are growers. Growers are divided into medical growers and recreational growers at 3 classes of licenses. Processors, secure transporters, provisioning centers, which deal with the transfer of medical marijuana, safety compliance facilities, micro businesses, retailers, which deal with the transfer of recreational marijuana, and primary caregivers, which are permitted uses to grow and to provide medical marijuana to registered patients. A summary of the regulations is that basically the uses are divided into separate categories, permitted in separate zoning districts. So by district, what is proposed is in the WLD downtown districts, provisioning centers and retail marijuana facilities are proposed as conditional uses. In the local commercial district, retail marijuana and provisioning centers are proposed as conditional uses. In the general commercial district, retail marijuana, provisioning centers, secure transporters, and safety compliance facilities are proposed as conditional uses. In the limited industrial district, growers, processors, secure transports, safety compliance facilities, and micro businesses are proposed as conditional uses. In the general industrial district, growers, processors, secure transporters, safety compliance facilities, and micro businesses are proposed as conditional uses. In the RTM district, processors and safety compliance facilities are proposed as conditional uses. There are standards that were developed for the consideration of these uses. They are supplemental standards that will be considered for all uses if the board chooses to adopt and if Planning Commission chooses to recommend adoption. They include buffers from schools, buffers from similar uses, standards for the safety of the use, security standards, and environmental standards, and they are detailed in the draft ordinance as well. So the process for amending the zoning ordinance has been followed in this case, and in all zoning modifications amendment cases. Planning Commission is charged with drafting the ordinance, holding a public hearing and accepting comments at that hearing from the public, and then making a recommendation to the Township Board. When that recommendation is made, the ordinance is forwarded to Township Board for consideration. The Township Board may vote to approve, may vote to deny, or may vote to modify and essentially send that ordinance back to Planning Commission with comments for approval. If that is the course the board takes, Planning Commission would consider modifications to this ordinance and then be required to hold another public hearing prior to sending a revised ordinance back to the Township Board for consideration. So we're at the point in the process where we are accepting comments from the public, and we're here to take those comments.
Anyone wishing to address the Planning Commission either for or opposed to the proposed language? You have 3 minutes.
State your name and address.
There's no one there yet.
I'm just saying, have them state their name and address.
Please state your name and address, please.
The name's David Gordon. The address is 5558 Helena Road. I was confused by one limitation within the zoning the ordinance for marijuana, and that's the 10-acre zoning. This is a profitable crop that can easily be grown on 5 acres, and our 5-acre zoning is, in fact, agricultural zoning. So I would recommend that we drop it to 5 acres so that people that own 5 acres could actually become growers, if that's possible. I don't know if the state requires 10 acres or not. In terms of marijuana, I think you could ask the police chief how many people that were high on pot ever took a swing at him versus people that are drunk that take a swing at him. I don't think marijuana would attract a bad element. Nationally, the nation's laws are behind the times of what's going on state by state. The voters of Michigan said we should have legal marijuana in this state, and that's the majority view. In a democracy, that's usually what rules. I've watched the war on drugs my entire adult life. We've been losing it for 60 years. It's causing people to kill each other. Drug wars are raging. Thousands of people are being killed. It makes no sense. Pot is a great product for a lot of illnesses. And at the federal level, it's still regulated as a Class 1 substance like heroin, which is nuts. So I would encourage you to be as welcoming to new businesses for marijuana as you are for a liquor store or a pharmacy. Thank you.
Mr. Gordon, we can have a clarification on his question regarding the 10 to 5 acres. Mr. Lippens.
Yeah, I'll clarify. The 5-acre growers are permitted in the proposed ordinance for medical Class A and recreational Class A growers, and the 10-acre minimum is suggested for Class B and Class C growers. And for the purpose of providing some details for the people who have attended tonight's meeting, I'll share the number of plants that are permitted with each license. Medical Class A growers, which would be permitted at 5 acres, are permitted to grow 500 marijuana plants. Recreational Class A growers, which would be permitted on 5 acres, are permitted to grow 100 marijuana plants. The Class B and Class C uses, which are limited to 10 acres, are in medical Class B, 1,000 marijuana plants, medical Class C, 1,500 marijuana plants, recreational Class B, 500 marijuana plants, and recreational Class C, 2,000 marijuana plants. So I believe that clarifies the question.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else wishing to make comment? Yes, sir. Please state your name and address, please.
Hi, my name's Wayne Davidson. I live at 8015 Coyle Road. I'm on a 4.3 acre parcel. I also have property in Beaverton, Michigan. I have a caregiver grow. The grow space in that grow is 24 by 32. I grow 72 plants and average $70,000 every 8 weeks to 9 weeks on a fully medical tested facility through Iron Labs. Howard is the CEO of the company. Welcome to call him and ask him about my stats. That's great. I don't feel you need that big of a space. If somebody's going to grow medical marijuana in a 10-acre parcel, be ready for Michigan's powdery mildew, molds, all the stuff that the weather permitted. You just need a building that's climate controlled. You don't need 10 acres, you don't need 5 acres, you don't need none of that. I just wanted to let the board know that. On top of that, the state is in the process of figuring out if they're going to let caregivers opt into the seed-to-sale system, which will be better for a lot of people as far as home grows, all that stuff, as long as their stuff is tested. Recreational, I'm kind of a medical guy, it's the way it is. Other than that, that's all I needed to say. You know?
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Just please state your name and address.
Sure. My name is John Hufford. I live at 5285 Tamarack Trail. I am a health policy researcher and analyst and an economist. And I'm mainly a libertarian when it comes to use of marijuana. But after I was surprised when the state voters voted to legalize it, and I started to do some research. I've been pretty much agnostic on it. And I was, pardon me? Oh, I'm sorry.
It's
Can
fine.
you hear me? Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Everybody hear me? If you can't hear me, raise your hand. Okay. All right. So I started to do some research on my own, and I was actually impressed with the amount of evidence that there is linking marijuana, and particularly adolescent brain development and mental health, mental illness. And I think that's something that we need to really consider strongly before we move forward. The voters may have legalized it. That doesn't make it the right thing to do for our township. I won't read. I brought one article which I can submit to the record. I won't read the whole article into the record. There's just a couple. This is from the Journal of the Journal of the American Medical Association, Psychiatry, which is basically the voice of the American Medical Association. Let's see if I can find my place again. Longitudinal investigation show a consistent association between, and in this case, adolescent cannabis use and psychosis. So we're talking about mental illness. And there's another one that it's basically undeniable that there's a mechanistic and physiological link between marijuana use and not psychosis, but schizophrenia. So these are things that we need to consider before we, sorry, is that light going off?
You have 1 minute.
Okay. Before we increase the access and because greater access means greater exposure, particularly to our young ones, and we need to take that into account before we, before you increase the access. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Certainly. Please state your name and address.
My name is Craig Warburton, and I live at 450 West Joy Road. I didn't study this near as much at length as I might have, perhaps, but my research on pot goes back into the early 60s. And if you can remember the 60s, you had nothing to do with it. I was amazed by some of the numbers in your permit, or in your document. You're going to allow 20 each of those growing licenses? So you could conceivably have 60,000 plants being grown in the township with 6 processors, 6 transporters, 6 safety compliance facilities, and 6 retail facilities. If you extend the numbers, they're stupid. I don't quite understand it. You certainly don't allow that kind of propagation of alcohol. In respect to the psychological effects on adolescents, anybody who lets an adolescent smoke pot needs to go to jail. It's no different than alcohol. It's going to be for people 21 and over. I found ambiguity with the way the caregiver has been treated in the document. There's that great line that says home occupations aren't permitted, but then they're included in all the discussions about permits. The medical system only got to where it is because of caregivers. The dispensaries would have had nothing to sell if somebody hadn't been growing something. I hope this goes forward. I do hope you take a little more sensible look at the distribution of permits and the number of plants. But I think the recreational requirement's going to grossly exceed the medical. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Warburton, and I will also refer to Mr. Lippens on a clarification.
Say the total number of growing licenses for any of the licenses or growing permits is proposed to be 20 total for all growers. So not 20 per class.
Thank you. Anyone else like to address the public hearing?
Chris Salata, 2920 Tepeyac Hill.
Just speak directly closer to the mic, please. Thank you.
I would agree with one comment that I think David Green made, and that is, this is nuts. And it's nuts because I just can't fathom that this body is contemplating this in conjunction with this years-long approach of trying to resuscitate this community, and we're going to rebuild this community on a foundation of drugs. That's nuts. I don't know if anybody has taken a look at what Colorado has been experiencing for 5 years and is documented through the healthcare profession, law enforcement profession, schools, the problems, socioeconomic, psychological, law enforcement are incredible. And here we are holding ourselves out as a community that wants families and fought tooth and nail to preserve our high school for our children. And now we're going to throw this at them and say we're a community that supports family and children? Am I the only one that sees a disconnect here? That's nuts. I'm an attorney. I represent real estate developers, builders, and in an unscientific poll I have done of colleagues and clients in that industry, there is no way you're going to attract residential or esteemed or builders, developers, industry that you want to attract to a family community when you have drugs, pot, at this scale that just is incredible to me. It's the first time hearing that, but it just sounds like it is something that's way beyond the pale in terms of the size of this community. And we're going to jump into this with what seems to me to be very little forethought, investigation, understanding of what all these classifications, zoning, cost, resource, dedication. That's nuts. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have public comment? Once. Yes, sir.
Thank
Please
you.
state your name and
Nelson.
address.
I'm at 5314 Walnut Creek.
I'm sorry, I stepped on you. Can you state your name again?
Doug Nelson, 5314 Walnut Creek.
Thank you.
So, my family, we moved this community 4 years ago from Monroe County. Excuse me. One of the direct reasons we moved from Monroe County is because of the opioid epidemic there. Heroin is very, very prevalent down there. We've had family friends die from overdoses down there. And without the, I don't have the data in front of me, but there is a direct link between marijuana use and escalation to opioids. From the 60s on, it has been a proven fact. So I just ask you to consider, as this gentleman was talking about, a family community. Part of the reasons we moved to this area was because of the family aspects of it and what it offers. You know, we want to be this rural community, but we kind of have these, you know, big community aspirations. I don't think this is the way to do it. We want to attract people here. We want to keep the quaintness of it, being like everybody else in the world and everybody else, every other county, every other township. It really doesn't sound like the way that we want to go forward. You know, are we going to advertise that we're a family community, or we're a community that's just going to let anything come into our community? So, I also wasn't able to read the whole draft, but what is law enforcement? What are their recommendations for this as well? And I'm not sure if that's the right. This is the right forum for that, but what has the public safety said about it? You know, what are the economic, what are the numbers being presented to us as a community that we're going to gain versus what we're not going to, you know, outlay for that? So that's just what I'd like to say is, let's think about what we want our community to look like. And I know from experience, you know, from our family, from moving, what that escalation does, and it affects young people, because the last one that died was 19 years old, and he just came out of rehab for the third time. He was a star football player, and now he's dead. Okay, he started with marijuana on his football team, escalated up to heroin. So please consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? You went once? Yeah, I can only let you go one time.
Oh, that's it? Okay.
Yes, sir. Please state your name and address.
My name is Kevin May. I live at 2955 Tepeyac Hill. I probably have a pretty unique story for you guys. I've lived in California, Colorado, and now Michigan. I've moved in those two previous states because of this very law that passed in this state. I'm a native of Colorado. The mountains are my home. The lakes, all that stuff that's in Colorado has been ruined since this has been passed. We have 5 lakes here in Michigan. You all are going to attract a bunch of people that come into this state that aren't looking to take care of us. Believe me. Hanging Lake in Colorado is a pristine lake that's been around for hundreds of years, thousands of years, a millennium. All of us natives in Colorado took care of this place and made it our own. Nobody's allowed to swim in it. We all followed the rules. What's going to take place here is what you're seeing on the news in Seattle, Washington, in LA, and everywhere that this has been passed in the United States. What comes with it is bad. Hanging Lake has been closed to the public in Colorado because of kegers and marijuana parties inside the lake of pristine melted water. Folks, that's one of the only few pieces of pristine water that Colorado has. We are going to have people here looking for sanctuary. We are going to have heroin addicts. It's how it starts. They're going to be sitting in the streets. Our children are going to be walking by these people. That's what's coming. That's what's came to every single community that has passed this. I very strongly recommend that you look at the voting record of every single person in our community and see if the people in this community voted to legalize marijuana before you go ahead and pass this in our community. See that we voted for it. I highly doubt 51% of the people in this community voted for the legalization of recreational marijuana in our community. I know this community. I am part of it. We are highly Catholic. We are very conservative, and we are extremely religious. We don't do this. Folks, this is a money grab, and the reason why you're looking at this is for money. We didn't get the votes to get our schools put in Ann Arbor School District. We're desperate for money.
30 seconds. Sir.
Think. We're going to have people with needles in our streets. We're going to become a sanctuary city. All the people are coming here for this. Don't you dare do it. Look, make sure our community voted for it before you do it. Please.
I would ask the chair to address anyone that would speak in that tone again to the board. That is not proper. Thank you.
Thank you. And as a clarification, Mr. Lippens, on the percentage.
Yeah, I'll try to find the voting records, but we did go through the voting records, and I think it was
All
close
three
to
precincts.
60% in all three
Yes.
precincts for recreational marijuana.
Thank you.
I have them, not mistaken, from the state records, but I'll pull it up.
Sir, you're out of order. You had your 3 minutes. Anyone else?
Make a motion to close the public, I apologize.
Please state your name and address.
Someone left their phone here. I'm Catherine Mayer. I'm at 5361 Sutton Road. I didn't prepare written comments. I realize now that I should have, but I'd like to use a few minutes to contest a few things that I've heard people say here tonight. I support putting the proposed ordinance changes into effect, and I did see that over 60% of the precinct where I vote was in favor of all three of the propositions that were on the ballot in the midterms. With all due respect to everyone that spoke, I appreciate that this is considered a family-friendly community, and I don't think that adopting these ordinances to put the township in line with the latest Michigan legislation does anything to challenge that. I think that people that are interested in it, I think that some people who are interested in getting involved in the recreational or medical marijuana industry now that this is passed don't want to hide or be relegated to a scary, unsafe, or urban sort of environment. Northfield Township will continue to attract the sort of citizens that it already does. I don't think that the proliferation of carefully regulated marijuana dispensaries in the city of Ann Arbor has made that community any less of a safe, friendly place. I think that it is very untrue to claim that smoking marijuana leads to heroin use. The reason why that has been thrown around a lot is because obviously somebody that's never smoked a cigarette in their life, never taken a drink of wine in their life, isn't going to suddenly pick up a needle and do some heroin. So it probably is true that 100% of the people that have done heroin started with marijuana. True, but probably 99% of people that ever smoke marijuana are never going to
10 seconds,
get into.
ma'am.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I think that we should
get in line with what the rest of the state is doing or lose out on the financial opportunities.
Thank you. Sir, you're out of order. Sir, we're not gonna debate it in the audience, sir. If you'd like to, you can step outside the room. Anyone else?
Make a motion to close the public hearing for medical marijuana,
Support.
recreational medical marijuana.
I support that. Any questions on that motion? Seeing none. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Moving on to reports committees. Board of Trustees, Ms. Chick.
The Board of Trustees met March 12th. The board authorized the manager to explore the possibility of an in-office building official / zoning administrator to make the processes move smoother and quicker for applicants. There was discussion on developing an ethics policy for the board, a building use policy, and clarification of the process to sell 75 Barker. There was also discussion on the Planning Commission recommendation to the board to rescind the motion to sell 75 Barker until additional information was acquired on the property. The board chose not to rescind. I also wanted to remind everybody that on March 26th, the public is invited to a discussion on the sewer updates, including the equalization basin and the sewer lines that will need to go out for bonding to fund. So I appreciate everybody's participation in that meeting as well. I think that's all.
Ms. Chick, can you restate the point about the planning process? I didn't quite get that. What was that regarding? It was early on.
The board authorized the manager to explore the possibility of an in-office building / zoning administrator, yes.
Thank you. ZBA, Mr. Kuzno.
ZBA did not meet since our last meeting.
Thank you. Anything from staff, Ms. Byrd? Planning consultant, Mr. Lippens.
Nothing that's not on the agenda this evening.
Thank you. Parks and Recreation, Mr. Iaquinto.
We have not met since our last meeting, but we do have a meeting tomorrow at 7 o'clock here in this building. Thank you.
Thanks.
Public is welcome.
And Downtown Planning Group, Ms. Infante.
At the most recent meeting, there was discussion about consulting with legal support, the possibility of creating 2 separate authorities with the downtown development area and then perhaps North Territorial District as a separate. There is some concern that was discussed about the downtown development area being dominated by nonprofit companies and the problem that obviously creates for capturing any tax revenue. There's a great deal of interest in expanding and participating in the DDA, which is marvelous. And there is, as always, concern about 75 Barker and a lack of decisive action on that particular item.
Thank you. So we'll move on to item 10A, unfinished business. It's to recommend to approve with conditions, or deny the revised site plan of Little Fish at 8425 Main Street to operate graphics and architectural design studio, parcel B-002-08-327-002. And for this, I will go to Mr. Lippens for his report.
Yes, good evening. If you'll recall that we looked at this site several months ago, and Planning Commission recommended approval with conditions. One of those conditions was granting of a permit from the Washtenaw County Road Commission for the configuration of the parking as it was proposed. The site plan was submitted to the county. The county essentially issued a denial letter for the parking as it was proposed. To make sure this project moves forward, we and the applicant did some outreach to the county. We met after several conversations. We met with the county and the applicant and arrived at a solution that will be likely permitted by the county. I did receive an email from Gary Strait, the county's engineer, today, indicating that he hasn't written his letter, but he believes what was submitted will be approved by the county. So we're back. It's a significant enough change that we had to bring it to you for review, and we're recommending that the site plan be approved. There are a few additional conditions that have not been resolved since the last time the site plan was reviewed by Planning Commission. So we've noted those also as conditions. I've also noted that I can accept letters with more details from the applicant when it provides us with enough details rather than an amended site plan, which I'm happy to do that administratively as we work through the approval process. The applicant has also requested a temporary certificate of occupancy. So we've recommended that could be granted if a performance guarantee is provided for the site improvement amendments. Just so Planning Commission knows, we have received from the applicant an initial estimate of what that is, what they believe will cost through the site improvements, and usually that's approved by Ron and his staff, so we anticipate we would be able to move forward with a temporary C of O if all these conditions are met. So I'm happy to take questions. I know the applicant is here, and also you probably want to hear from OHM.
We do, but before I go to OHM and the applicant, enclosed in our packet was from Vidya Krishnan, dated October 5th, 2018, I believe. Is there anything you need to address as far as her report goes, Mr. Lippens?
No, what I did was I provided you with all of the letters that have done on this case, so Planning Commission can be aware of the context and how we've been working to make sure this site will comply with zoning regulations, but also trying to facilitate the use to be initiated at the site. I think we had some discussion at the last meeting, but I didn't say it tonight, but this is really a very positive use. We're excited that the use is coming into the township and really want to help them get underway as soon as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Cavallaro, you want to go over your report, please?
Sure. We have our letter dated March 18th, 2019. Just a couple minor comments remaining. First one, they now show the sanitary sewer manholes and line out in the front of the building, and it's buried, so they couldn't come up with an elevation or exactly where it is. So we've just noted that once they get under construction, someone from the township will have to observe that to make sure it's done appropriately, the work's done on it is appropriate. They also had two-way parking shown on the north side, and I think both Mr. Lippens and I agree that it probably would be best served to be one-way, but we'll await the decision on the road commission on that. And then we've just noted a couple of soil erosion control items that need to be taken care of on the plans, assuming that they get all their approvals that we've also noted in our letter.
Thank you. Is Ms. Matthews or representative of Little Fish available to step up to the microphone? Just state your name and give us, you can comment on the resubmittal.
Sure thing. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. For the record, Matt Haggerty with the law firm of Myers & Myers, 915 North Michigan Avenue in Howell. Also with me is, of course, Angela Matthews, the property owner and applicant, on behalf of Little Fish, and Scott Peruski of PEA Engineering. I want to first say very briefly, I very much appreciate both Ms. Bird and Mr. Lippens for coordinating us on the agenda this evening, and particularly Mr. Lippens for taking the time, as he referenced, to have a meeting with Gary Strait at the Road Commission, myself, and Ms. Matthews to address the parking situation, which took some tweaking and modifications, but I think have arrived at a solution that will work on site. One practical thing I'd like to mention that Ms. Matthews can speak to in greater detail is the request for a temporary certificate of occupancy. Mr. Lippens also made mention of that. I think both, well, I know under state law, the state construction code in the township ordinance permit a temporary certificate of occupancy to be issued so long as it does not create any kind of endangerment to the health, safety, or welfare of the occupants or users of the building. Ms. Matthews is in the process of procuring a performance bond for the site work that'll be necessary. That doesn't deal with so much the sticks and bricks or the interior of the building, but the site improvements for traffic circulation, et cetera. So part of the request for approval by the Planning Commission would be that we could get a temporary C of O and have those building inspections done as soon as possible while Ms. Matthews is procuring the bond to get that work to be a condition of the approval. Time is of the essence in getting her up and running, and we would be hopeful, because state law does permit it, that a temporary C of O subject to the final issuance of a performance bond to the township be approved. So I'm happy to entertain any questions on the site. Obviously, the engineer can speak better to that than I can, but anything else that's gone on procedurally, we concur with Mr. Lippens that this is a very positive project to the township, right across from the township hall, and I think it'd be a great benefit to the community.
Thank you. I have a clarification right now for you about the temporary certificate of occupancy. The Planning Commission has no say-so on that. It will not be part of a recommendation or an approval tonight. It is strictly through the zoning administrator, the building official, that would be addressed. I understand the concern that you want to be in the building, continue to do what you need to do, and we are happy that Little Fish has come to the township. Don't get me wrong, but that is beyond the scope of the Planning Commission, and it won't be part of an approval tonight. It's based on administrative issues. Although Mr. Lippens made the point that that's what you're looking to do, and we understand that's what you're looking to do. So I just wanted to make that point, Mr. Lippens. I do have a big concern generally at the plans. I don't think ever before that we've gotten a set of plans that didn't have building elevations that I remember. And I know they're requested by McKenna, and Mr. Lippens offered that elevation and exterior building issues could be done via letter through this process. It's my personal opinion that it's not a practice that we would like to start or continue, so that ultimately I think the building elevation should be done as part of the plan. And I'll take comments from other commissioners. That's just me, myself.
I understand.
Other commissioners? Any comments on the elevations, Mr. Zarzecki?
No, I agree. We should have the elevations on the drawings.
Can you yeah,
Thought
there
it
you
was
go.
close enough. Definitely should have the elevations added to the drawings. It's just standard practice in the industry, and will assist our code enforcement officers and everybody else to make sure everything's in compliance. So I agree with Mr. Roman.
Thank you. Mr. Kuzno.
Perhaps it's because they're existing buildings that they felt that it wasn't necessary to provide elevations. Is this true?
Yes, sir. So I'm Angela Matthews, owner of Little Fish and property owner. Our building elevations were part of the architectural package, part of the building set. Nothing's being modified to any of the elevations. We have removed the 30-year-old dilapidated shingles and have replaced that with a standing seam roof. And we did roof repair. We replaced the windows, but other than that, the elevations of the building, either structure, are not being modified, but they are part of the architectural set.
And is the architectural is not submitted as part of the site plan?
The architectural was submitted, 12 copies when did we do that? Back in, I'm gonna say September.
I think
or
you
when
had
we started.
renditions of interior design, interior looks, possibly a rendition of an exterior at the rear.
I don't believe our architectural set was submitted to the planning commission, but there are stamped architectural sets for construction in the townships.
Mr. Lippens, is that correct? That, to your knowledge?
I
For
can't,
Mr. Kuzno?
I haven't seen them, but if they were submitted for the building inspector, it might not have come my way.
Ms. Bird, can you confirm? Okay, we can check on that. My point being is that you can address it through a letter with Mr. Lippens. For the record, we need an elevation, and perhaps, we don't want to have this as a cause to slow any process, but you can work out with Mr. Lippens administratively about the elevations, and I would still like to see that plans are submitted.
I understand your comment. I would say if Planning Commission entertains a motion tonight, and I did say there were a number of things that I'd be happy to review via letter administratively. If that's not one of them, I would just note it in the motion. And it sounds like they exist, so we'll get them submitted, and I can include them as an informational update to Planning Commission when the site plan's approved.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the commissioners? Seeing none, thank you. I make a motion to approve with conditions Little Fish at 8425 Main Street along with the conditions set forth in the McKenna report of March 15th, 2019, and the OHM report March 18th, 2019.
Support.
Supported by Mr. Iaquino. Any questions, comments on that motion? Would you like me to state in that, Mr. Lippens, about the elevations, an addendum to your listed items?
Yes, I would recommend that you state that you want the elevations submitted as part of the motion.
Okay, so we'll amend the motion to include the building elevations at a future date at Mr. Lippens' convenience to provide those to the Planning Commission as part of the conditions. Ms. Limbo, you got that? Thank you. And I still have support.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Zarzaki?
Mr. Roman?
Yes.
Ms. Chick?
Yes.
Mr. Quinto?
Yes.
Mr. Kuzno?
Yes.
Zarzaki, yes. Mr. Dryer?
Yes.
Mr. Fonte?
Yes.
Passes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being present tonight. Appreciate it, and good luck. Next item is 10B.
I make a motion to recommend approval of passing on the sign ordinance revision to the Northfield Township Board.
Supported by Ms. Chick. Any questions, comments on that motion? Seeing none, we will do a roll call vote again. Mr. Zarzaki?
Mr. Roman?
Yes.
Ms. Chick?
Yes.
Mr. Quinto?
Yes.
Mr. Kuzno?
Yes.
Zarzaki, yes. Mr. Dryer?
No, yes.
Thank you.
And Mr. Quinto?
Yes.
Thank you very
Yes.
much. Okay. And we go to item 10C. I make a motion to approve and forward to the Board of Trustees the recreational medical marijuana ordinance.
Support.
Supported by Mr. Iaquino. Any questions, comments on that? Am I correct? Just a minute, Mr. Kuzno. Am I correct with that, Mr. Lippens?
You are correct.
The other item needs no action.
The other item needs no action. You could make an advisory recommendation, but
Okay, we can do that separately or
you
together?
can do that separately.
We'll do it separately.
For discussion, I do have one typo to recommend, but I could do that now or after planning commission discussion.
As far as the ordinance or the?
Yes.
Okay, what is you want to clarify that?
Yeah, I'll provide the clarification prior to township planning commission discussion. It's on page 8, and it's in the standards. We refer to the WLDLF district for lakefront district. It's actually the waterfront district, WLDW. So it's not a substantive change, but it should be made. So I would recommend that the commission recognize that edit and anything else you discuss this night.
Thank you. So we have that clarification and the motion. I have support, right, Mr. Iaquino?
Yes, sir.
Any questions, other questions, comments on that? Mr. Kuzno?
On the motion, correct?
On the motion
Okay,
of the
not
ordinance.
on the correction. All right, so heard lots of good commentary today. I'm glad that the public came out. This is your township. This is your chance to say what you want to say, what you feel is good and bad in your township. I want to read the 100 words, the proposal that was on our state ballot back in November. Okay, we all know what it was. So this proposal would, A, allow individuals 21 and older to purchase, possess, and use marijuana and marijuana infused in edibles and grow up to 12 marijuana plants for personal consumption. 2, impose a 10-ounce limit of marijuana kept at a residence and require amounts over 2.5 ounces to be secured in locked containers. 3, create a state licensing system for marijuana businesses and allow municipalities to ban or restrict them. 4, permit retail sales of marijuana and edibles subject to a 10% tax dedicated to implementation costs, clinical trials, schools, roads, and municipalities where marijuana businesses are located. And the last one is change several current violations from crimes to civil infractions. Should this proposal be adopted, yes or no? So the state of Michigan voters had 100 words to vote on, and this is what they voted on, and they agree, I admit, overwhelmingly agreed to do it. So the one portion where we're been given charge to do anything on here is, so first of all, it says create a state licensing system for marijuana businesses and allow municipalities. So our part is allow municipalities to ban or restrict them. So our portion is to ban or restrict them at this point, correct? Yes. So
I can respond after you're done.
my understanding is that the state licensing system has not even been created yet. Is this true, Paul?
It has not been created.
Okay, so I'm not understanding why we're even having this discussion right now without having the state developing their own set of rules. Secondly, what if ours are conflicting with whatever the state comes up with? What happens then? Those are just questions, those are rhetorical questions. Things that we didn't ask ourselves during this process. I also learned that these businesses are generally cash businesses. And why are they cash businesses? Because they violate federal law. Federal law is something that people don't want to deal with, and bankers don't want to deal with marijuana dealers because they will be implicated as a criminal if they participate. So therefore, all of the business is done by cash. Mr. McClellan made a very valid point there, and I think he's right. And I guess the question is, how do we as a township, or how does the state regulate cash businesses? How do they collect the taxes that we claim to be getting from this business if we can't even keep track of what's going on over there? So those are just a few things. Are there other comments that other people have tonight from the board at all? I'm curious because I don't want to close the discussion, but I want to make sure that the conversation continues.
Thank you. I do have a few things. This was a request from the Board of Trustees for us to devise the ordinance. If the laws, when and if the laws come from LARA is in conflict with our ordinance, it can be amended, simply. And all these facts were known during our discussion prior. This planning commission is not the end-all be-all for this ordinance. It's being recommended either with changed or the way it is to the Board of Trustees, so there will be further discussion at their level. We are simply doing what we were requested to do, and is get the ordinance language in order for the future. Mr. Aquino.
You stated exactly what I was going to state, because we did have those items as part of our discussions during several of the draft discussions, that this was preliminary. This was a request by the Township Board for us to work on, and that our ordinance would be amended if it is a variable difference from the states. So we did discuss all of that in the meetings. Thank you.
Ms. Chick.
So I think everybody knows the background already. So the board passed a motion that we would opt out of businesses for 6 months. I can't remember the ending date. It was either May or April 28th. So we had 6 months. At the end of 6 months, the board would decide whether or not we were going to opt in and allow businesses in the township for sure, because the sunset clause expires then. And in the meantime, because we want to be prepared, if the board decides at that point that yes, we are going to go ahead and do this, that we have to have our ordinances in place so that there's no confusion at the last minute, getting people coming in, asking about setting up businesses if we opt in, that we're prepared. And yes, when the state comes down with their regulations, and the other issue was we were also advised that it is entirely possible that the state could take less than a year to come down with their regulations, so we wanted to be prepared just in case they do, but we will have to change anything if it doesn't match up with what the state comes down with.
Mr. Kuzno, you had your hand.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks for that clarification. So I feel like, and I requested this during our discussions up prior to this point, that I don't think we properly vetted this ourselves, and it was raised tonight by some of the citizens that came out. We never consulted our police force. We never consulted the clerk's office. We never consulted zoning administrator as to how that would impact their life, how it would, what kind of considerations we should have in regards to what they do in this township. Because once we do this, we're basically out of it. I mean, we might get a request for a what's it called, non-conforming or a special use. And we might see these things come before us, but it's not up to us to be enforcing them, and we're kind of handing this over to other folks that are responsible for enforcing it, and I just don't think we, as a board ourselves, did a proper vetting of this whole thing, quite honestly.
Understand your opinion. Ms. Chick? No. Mr. Dwyer first.
I'd just like to reiterate my previously stated position. You know, we may not have the ability to ban, but we have been charged with the, recommendations to restrict. I don't believe any activity in the AR district, particularly commercial, particularly micro business, which has allowed retail sales, is appropriate. And if we are going to go down this road, everything needs to be at the 23 corridor. And if we do opt in as a community, then any commercial activity needs to be at the 23 corridor in the general industrial districts, nothing in the AR district.
Mr. Zarzaki.
I agree with the locations being only in the industrial, probably a few exceptions. We have this registered primary caregiver, and one of my concerns with that is we're listing the primary caregiver as having to get these licenses at $5,000 per year. That may be a little bit extreme for an individual that is simply providing care. And the way I read the way we wrote our ordinance, they are listed as a authorized facility, and it doesn't restrict that amount of money or amount of feet against them. And I would like to revisit that before we go any further.
Mr. Lippens, you have comment on Mr. Zarzecki's point?
I don't believe it was the intent to require a permit for the caregiving use. The caregiving use is a home occupation that is currently permitted in the township. So I think, possibly let's look at the place in the ordinance that's causing that confusion. And
Ms. Chick?
23-4, page 5, medical marijuana home occupations do not require permits.
Can you restate that, Ms. Chick?
On, section 23-4, item 7, medical marijuana home occupations do not require permits.
But then down on page 6, it stated that the payment of the application fee of $5,000 applies regardless of the class of state operating license permit. So this includes all classes A, B, C, recreational and medical. So I don't know if it's ambiguous or if there's a conflict.
Can you restate that section that you were
Sure,
quoting?
that is 23-6, and it begins on page 5 and runs through to page 6, and it is regarding specifically application of new annual permit, and if you look at 1 E, F, G, H, and it's I, payment of a non-refundable application fee of $5,000, if that's referring to the classes previous H, that's classes A, B, and C, recreational and medical. So if this states medical and medical is the home occupation, I was confused about that too, and I don't know if that is ambiguous or it just takes a lawyer to figure it out.
Mr. Lippens, can you clarify that?
I would say it takes a lawyer to figure it out. This is it's a question of interpretation of the text, but the caregiver is a protected activity, and we've defined that as a home occupation, and it is not a class that is included in these permit requirements. I would make 2 comments on this discussion. One is, as we noted in developing this is the adoption of permit requirements is an activity that happens at the board. In order to make sure that the thinking was holistic, Planning Commission took this up so that the zoning regulations that were forwarded or could be forwarded would also have permitting requirements attached to them as well. So we are not required to hold a public hearing to change these. This activity would happen at the board, and we could certainly, Planning Commission could talk about making some changes to this before you forward it. It's currently not the agenda item we're talking about, though.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, in other words, we have a motion on the floor regarding the ordinance language, and there's going to be another motion on the permit regulations. So, is there any other comments on the ordinance language?
So the permitting one is also tonight?
The permitting regulations is not required to have a public hearing, and we are just forwarding a recommendation based on what we did. That's what Mr. Lippens.
And that's already been voted on, is what you're saying?
No.
No.
So any other questions on the ordinance?
Okay.
That was open for public hearing.
Just real quick, so I noticed we got a map today from Paul. Do we know what the position of Green Oak Township is on their marijuana laws? Because we have 4 locations that we deem viable on our map that are right on the border between our township and their township, which I'm just curious if that would have any influence on their rules relative to housing or schools or parks over there on their side of the world.
You know, based on my interpretation of our language, if there was a site in Green Oak Township that met one of these classes of marijuana facilities, we could interpret that to be within the buffer and not permit something to site in our township.
Or vice versa.
Well, they could make a decision if their zoning ordinance aligned with ours, but not to cite a facility in this township. We would notify any businesses within, or actually any sites within 300 feet of a site as part of our special land use requirement, even if those properties were outside of the township.
Okay.
To make a clarification on this map, this is really this is an analysis that Planning Commission asked us to do to illustrate that the number of licenses that were being proposed are somewhat feasible if all of these sites actually met all of the conditions. So these are not proposed sites, and I think that one of the things in doing this exercise, we could move these around and find that there are still places to cite all these uses. So this is really a test of your standards, and it shows 6 permits being issued for each of the use types, with the exception of growing facilities, where it shows 20 facilities. And those are only shown in the districts that Planning Commission has proposed them to be permitted. And we also, for illustrative purposes, in the AR district, showed the sites that are under 5 acres, over 5 acres, and then over 10 acres.
Any other questions? Again, Mr. Kuzno.
Quick comment, sorry. So it looks like there's a fair amount of concentration up near the North Village, which we're trying to promote as a potentially family-friendly area. We're trying to draw in businesses to build apartments or condos up there, trying to create a pavilion and a park for our citizens, and we're also proposing to put marijuana shops right down the street from all of that. I wonder how that's going to do, and we're having a hard enough time selling that property as it is, and it seems like this is not going to be a real positive influence for that. And I guess it just kind of seems contrary to some of the, I agree with a lot of the comments that were made tonight, that we're really not promoting wholesome lifestyle here in the township by providing this stuff in the township. And I understand it's our job as a planning commission. I wish the board would have given us better direction, quite honestly. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and concern, Mr. Kuzno. All of these points that you're bringing up now at the end were discussed prior, most of them. And we understand, or I understand, your point of view regarding the topic. But it was all part of our discussion, and we had a consensus of the Planning Commission, which you were not the majority opinion of. So, but I do appreciate where you're coming from and pointing out all the facts, as well as the comments Mr. Zarzecki and Mr. Dwyer brought up. Those were all discussed also openly at a meeting, and we have a consensus of the board. So we have a motion on the floor to approve and recommend or forward the recommendation to the Board of Trustees. We'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Zarzecki.
Mr. Roman.
Yes.
Ms. Chick.
Yes.
Mr. Quinto.
Yes.
Mr. Kuzno.
No.
Zarzecki, yes. Mr. Dwyer.
No.
Ms. LaFonte.
Yes.
It passes.
Passions 5-2.
5-2.
Thank you. And I will also make a motion for the recommendation of the permit regulations to be forwarded to the Board of Trustees and also request the township attorney review prior to being placed on the township board agenda.
Support.
Supported by Mr. Iaquino. Any questions, comments on that motion? Mr. Kuzno.
I don't see this on the agenda. Is it on the agenda?
It could have been done together, but since I made that one motion, I was trying to make the conversation and comments more specific instead of such a broad spectrum. And I just discussed with Mr. Lippens that we can make the motion separately.
All right.
It's under the same topic generally.
And it was included in the packet. We possibly should have made it 2 agenda items.
Possibly, but the information was provided prior to the meeting and for the public hearing. So did I have support on that?
Yes, you did.
Excuse me, Mr. Iaquino, support. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Zarzecki?
Mr. Roman?
Yes.
Ms. Chick?
Yes.
Mr. Quinto?
Yes.
Mr. Kuzno?
No.
Zarzaki, yes. Mr. Dryer?
No.
Ms. Safante?
Yes.
Passes 5-2 again.
Thank you. Okay, there's no new business tonight. Everyone received a copy of the minutes from the March 6, 2019 meeting.
I haven't.
I make a motion to approve and dispense with reading.
Support.
Supported by Mr. Iaquino. Comments, questions on the minutes, Ms. Chick?
I have a couple of changes. On the first page, under number 5, first call to the public, third sentence down, it says it addressed developed far more frequently than preservation. It should be development, I believe. And I have one more. Are we good?
Ms. Slimbo, get that?
Okay.
Thank you.
And then on page 2, excuse me, number 11B, all the way down, in the Chick said the township has lost, okay. The decision was put up, the board's decision was to put the property up for sale for 6 months, and then I need to fall on my sword here because, and it says to raise it after that if it is not sold. We only moved on selling it, we did not move on raising it. Just take out, everything after 6 months.
Anything else? Any others?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, we have a motion to approve with those changes. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Final call to the public. We can again go to the public. You have 3 minutes if you'd like to address the Planning Commission. Just state your name and address when you reach the podium.
Doug Nelson, 5314 Walnut Creek. During the discussion on the comments of the marijuana ordinance, I believe, Mr. Roman, you said that you had consensus, which would indicate you had consensus prior to this public hearing. So what's the point of the public hearing if it's already been decided? So it's just my comment, question.
I'll answer you during my comment time.
Because as a citizen, that takes anything I have to say out of the picture. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Jackie Otto, 1075 St. Andrews Drive in Whitmore Lake. It's a little strange being on this side of the fence, but I'm glad I'm able to address you. And thank you very much for bringing the ordinance, however hard it is to make decisions like this. One thing I wanted to bring to the board attention is there is a difference between the medical marijuana and the recreational marijuana for the township. Medical marijuana, we were supposed to opt in order to have medical marijuana in our township. For a recreational, we had to opt out in order to stop it. And there is a reason for that, because there was a provision made in the voting that is forcing townships' hands to either opt out or opt in. As far as Chief Wagner is concerned, he has commented on this, but I am not going to speak for him on this. I think that you do need to have a conversation with him, but he has spoke on this many times. Our township temporarily opted out. And basically, if a township doesn't opt out, the state can automatically grant a license within the township or within any city, and they can grant as many as they want if you don't have an ordinance or anything. So in Michigan, over the hundreds of cities and townships that we have, only 60 have opted out so far. On the recreational marijuana ballot, the language included a provision allowing a referendum on the issue, meaning that voters can petition to initiate an ordinance, which means if we opted out and we said we didn't want it in our township because 60% of the voters in our township said they wanted it, they could put it back on the ballot and put an ordinance in place and vote on it. So that's why we've asked you to do this. This has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with doing the right thing by the voters. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to address the Planning Commission? Yes, ma'am. You can bring up the question and we can answer it, a comment, one of our comments. But it's not a question and answer time, but you can make your comment.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm Catherine Mayer, 5361 Sutton Road.
Thank you.
And my question is whether there will be any opportunity after tonight for us or for other residents to make other comments on this matter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? State your name and address.
I'm Wayne Davidson. I live at 8015 Coyle. Was kind of wondering about the square footage of even the micro business caregiver, like you're saying. Currently, a caregiver can grow 72 plants, and to do 100 plants, it's not that big of a, much bigger of a facility. Just saying 1,000 square feet is definitely sufficient. As long as it's climate controlled, it smells, all what you say, you know. It's just ways to do things. You don't need 5 acres.
Thank you.
If you're in the agricultural zone, you need 5 acres.
Adam Only, Whitmore Lake resident. I just was streaming the meeting on my way here because I couldn't make it. I don't know if it was clarified in other comments as I was walking up the steps, but for Ms. Chick, the comment of the board opting in at some point after that sunset clause, the sunset clause expires on that date and we're in. So if there's when the clause expires, the township is in. That's how a sunset clause works. The board would have to take action then to opt out. So on that date, if no action is taken, the township's in. So I don't think it was a misunderstanding maybe of how that works. So I appreciate you guys putting in the time to put this together, and hope that we can come up with some reasonable solutions for this business. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, we'll go to comments from commissioners. I'll begin on the 3 points that 3 different speakers at the comments to the commissioners. What I meant by consensus, there was different views existing on the Planning Commission regarding the medical and recreational marijuana language. These same concerns were discussed as the Planning Commission actually looked and formed the requirements. And my comment was not to disregard any public comment from the public. That was not the intent of how I although you may have taken that intent of how I phrased it, being that it was consensus prior, but that's what I meant was that this was all from a ground-up basis. All those points were discussed previously. So to answer that question, there will be an opportunity for the further public comment at the Board of Trustees level. And the gentleman that is referencing the square footage or the square footage of a growing facility, what he's referring to is the minimum 5 acres for growing. I do not disagree with you. It's my opinion. I brought that point up from the onset. Other commissioners felt differently, so perhaps they could respond to that. Other than that, that's it. And I would like to start, Ms. Chick?
To Mr. Olney's comment, when the sunset clause expires, the board can vote to extend it, or they can vote to opt out again. So it's not like once it's expired, it's done. That's that's what I was trying to explain. And I wanted to say too, I appreciate everybody's opinion on this. You can find as many articles, as many comments, many opinions for as against. Our job from the board was to create an ordinance to protect the township. And whether we agree with whether it's good for the township or not, that wasn't this board's decision. This board was simply to create an ordinance to protect the township no matter which way it goes. So I just wanted to say that it's not that we don't disagree or agree on people's positions. It's the job that we were given to do.
Thank you. Mr. Aquino?
Thank you. Yes, I too as well do appreciate all the public comments that come in. And again, I have to look at those as if they were very specific toward the structure of the ordinance and specificity of the ordinance, because again, as a planning commission, we were asked by the township board to go ahead and create an ordinance. So simply just opposing it or being for it is important, but I, as a commissioner, was hoping to see if there was any specificity in respect to the specific aspects of the ordinance. Because again, as Ms. Chick and other commissioners have stated, if we simply neglect to do what the board has asked us to do, we are jeopardizing the position of the township in a future time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kuzno?
Thank you. So we just heard from one of our township board members that the police chief has made multiple comments about this thing at some point in time, and we didn't hear them once at our board here. I just find that interesting that he may have made those verbal comments at the board, who gave us the job to get this job done, but we didn't get to hear from him. That's one thing. I did read the ballot wording earlier. I am not convinced that voters understood fully that they were voting to have businesses in their backyard, their next door neighbor, their aunt, their uncle, their whoever. I believe that people voted for recreational marijuana to have and hold. They can grow their own 12 plants if they want. They can smoke pot and do whatever they want legally. But I'm not convinced that they wanted to have businesses in our township. And I don't know if you have any numbers on that, but that's just my opinion. And then the township did have the ability to opt out permanently, and I believe they still do. So, I mean, opting out right away was a good idea to sort this out, but I think that we should not take the permanent opting out off the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zarzaki?
Thank you. I'm not going to repeat what everybody's already said because I agree with it. We have fulfilled our duty as requested by the trustees to develop some type of marijuana regulations for their review. And there's going to be additional reviews, there's going to be additional comments. The police chief will comment, everybody should comment on it. And I hope those in our audience that are either for or against actually show up for the next meeting with the Board of Trustees and express their opinions. But we were requested to develop an ordinance, which we have with the knowledge that we were given. Yes, the state has not fully developed their licensing. It's not unusual in government that we start with something and have to keep modifying it till we get it right. Very common. So I feel we've accomplished what we need to do. Everybody has their opinion, and I hope they continue to express it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dwyer.
I think I was one of the 40% that voted no. Given that, and assuming we're opting in, then it's a case of how do we handle it. And I think the ordinance as written is nowhere near as restrictive as it should be. You know, the geographical spread is way too big. The number of licenses proposed are way too many. And I would agree with Mr. Kuzno that I think most people voted to be allowed to use it, not to be the epicenter of 4 townships in providing it.
Thank you. Ms. Infante.
I also agree with most of the comments. The only thing I would want to say is that we have been extraordinarily careful and attentive to all the comments that we receive. Anyone who shows up first and third Wednesday of every month, we have 2 calls to the public. It doesn't have to be a public hearing. We really do want to hear from you. And I do think that as things fall out, the numbers are going to shrink radically when you consider the amount of capital that a person has to have to even consider one of these endeavors. So I think that we have been really careful and attentive and really invite more people to come to the meetings on the first and third Wednesday every month. 2 calls to the public.
Thank you. I'd like to announce the next regular meeting, April 3rd, 2019, and I make a motion to adjourn.
Support.
Supported by Mr. Iaquinto. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you.